Hey Deckers, the Black Myth Wukong benchmark tool has arrived, and so far so good on the Steam Deck. It's looking like we might actually be playing this, and I'm ecstatic as this is one of my most anticipated games. I've been following this one for the last few years. We're going to look at 4 main configurations here, and I think you can probably tell without anything up on the screen which one of these is running frame generation. But through the quality of the images throughout this first section, can you tell which one is XESS and FSR, and one of them's even running at medium settings? There isn't much in it, which is kind of good, but XESS 80% low with a little bit of medium settings is the one on the left, with FSR 90% with frame generation second, FSR 80% with no frame generation third, and finally XESS at 60% and medium graphic settings. So you may not have noticed a huge amount of difference between them, although the frames per second is a little different. But what you will notice, as usual, is that the frame generation, although the frames per second is higher, it definitely doesn't look as smooth as the others. But overall, the crisp and cleanness of the image is actually quite impressive across the board here. Now, considering these are on the low to medium settings, we do get an overall of around 41 on our kind of recommended settings, but get highs of 55 and a low of 27. Frame generation does stick higher with an average of 48, but going only down to 40 on the minimum, but that frame issue is really going to do your head in, and considering this is going to be a lot of timed parries, I think, then there's going to be some issues with latency there as well. 80% on the FSR matching the XESS settings. It's actually giving a lower average, believe it or not, so I definitely think there's some FSR processing issues, and as expected, pushing things to medium, even with 60% resolution scale, we still aren't managing to hold that 30 frames per second. But what it does look like is that we are going to be able to play this at around 30 to 40 frames per second in the main game. Now, when I was saying low to medium, the default actually has medium on with borderless, FSR and frame generation on, but for the XESS, it's just 80% resolution scale, everything on low except for texture quality and anti-aliasing quality. And then same with the medium version of the XESS, put that down to 60% resolution scale, but then the medium preset. But as you saw, although we don't see a huge graphical bump, we do see a huge dip in that frames per second overall. So here is the XESS 80% that low to medium default versus the 60% medium quality on the right. And as you can see, it's definitely not worth trying to push up those graphics at the moment, as the low to medium settings, even at that 80% resolution scale, does still look incredibly good and is giving that smoother image. So we may be able to get a bit more balance on the medium to low with XESS to actually push a more stable 30, but I feel like we are going to want to be targeting 40 with this one, as it is going to be a fairly fast-paced game in the sections. With the FSR, we started off with the 80% FSR, no frame generation with that low to medium settings, and then with the frame generation, it's keeping those exact same settings but just turning that frame generation on. But because the default actually has it at 90, we did leave it at 90 with that frame generation as the recommended settings. Again, putting the FSR 80 with no frame generation versus the FSR 90 with frame generation on side by side here. Again, you don't really notice any, if at all, graphical difference, but you can definitely see that that frame pacing issue is causing that right side to be less smooth. So overall, although on paper frame generation is going to up to double the frame rate, on the Steam Deck it's still not implemented the way that we want it to, and is not going to really benefit you in this one. Hopefully we see frame generation improve as we move forwards, but I would definitely be sticking with XESS around 80% and the low preset when we dive into the main game, as I do feel like this does look absolutely incredible. Can't wait to dive into this one. Only a week or so left before we actually get our hands on the main game, so let us know in the comments below if you're going to be diving into this one and if you're going to be playing on the deck or elsewhere. I'll leave you with a bit of playthrough of each of the configurations full screen so you can get a better feel for the actual benchmark and the full graphics here on the deck. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.